Hello all, I'm KelKidman and welcome to Breaking on the Daily, where today we're going to begin with Don Lemon because he's said a lot of weird things over the past few weeks, and it begins back on March 12th, where he was tearing into Ron Johnson for his complaints about the Capitol riots, where he said he's spewing blatant racism. To read off the original quote first from Johnson, he says, those were people that love this country, that truly respect law enforcement, which seems to be accurate. If you've seen the pictures from the actual riot itself, trespassing as I like to call it, then you'll know that many of the people involved here were following in the red velvet tape. And for the most part, they were just kind of walking around the building. And even the people who were going into restricted areas, for the most part, just walked around, including Q Shaman, the one who everyone knows about, was just kind of walking around. Yes, there were assaults, there were things that happened, and those people, of course, should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, because that's what we should be doing. People who violate the rights of others, people who attack people, of course, deserve those sorts of, consequences. But at the same time, of course, there needs to be consequences for the people on the other side. There needs to be a consequence for the police officer who shot Ashley Babbitt in what seems to be completely unjustifiable circumstances. But, of course, this got Don Lemon into a tizzy, saying he's spewing up blatant racism, which I don't know where he's getting that, but of course, Don Lemon has a kind of penchant for these sorts of comments. He always and constantly is trying to stir up these sorts of what you might call random acts of racism, I guess. The sort of idea that people who say things which have nothing to do with race, never even mention it, will, in fact, be bringing on racism. Of course, it's not just on that issue that he does it as well. He also does it on things like homosexuality, which he did back when the Vatican was refusing to not be Catholic for once. And he said that God is not about hindering people. And his comments on God have been some of the weirdest things I've ever seen, because it beggars belief that someone could believe this sort of thing having read anything from the Bible or any spiritual text whatsoever, any religious text, any philosophical text. Because here's the thing. If your moral arbiter is not about limiting people, or at least telling people how to limit themselves, as would be the case in the Christian God, as would be the case in that case with the Christian God and the Jewish God and most of the Abrahamic gods, what are they for? Why does the moral arbiter exist if the moral arbiter is not going to be the moral arbiter? That's what God is, by the way, for those who are somehow unaware, which I don't know how, but hey, there are people like Don Lemon, where he says that, I respect people's right to believe in God, but only if you agree with all of my political beliefs. And once again, it's just a fascinating clip that shows the utter ignorance of many people like Don Lemon, and it amazes me that this person is still taken seriously to this day. And it is really amazing how close these statements are to each other, because this was just the next day, on March 15th. How does this keep happening? Well, it's not going to stop happening, because there's even a third one, which was actually the story that spurred on this segment, where a former CNN producer has had to step in on Don Lemon's dangerous rhetoric on gun violence, because he said some not so great things, where to quote him exactly, every single one of us is just playing the odds at this point. The odds that it's in a country of 325 million souls that we won't be the ones who get hit by the next bullets that start flying. We won't be the ones that get the phone call about someone who you love who did. That phone call changes your life. And yeah, a former CNN producer called on the network to step in, and it is really, really insane. This is the sort of thing that you can't really show generally on national television. Reason being that people are worried about things like suicide. And if you catch someone with this sort of rhetoric when they do have suicidal tendencies and are depressed, that might spur them on to a suicide attempt. And yeah, this sort of absolute cynicism, which, by the way, doesn't have any basis in statistical reality, and is also an example of Don Lemon not acknowledging the individuality of any given person's particular situation. Yeah, if you're in Chicago, if you're in Detroit, if you're in New York, or in any of those sorts of very heavily regulated, very lacking in gun rights places, where there are very high crime rates, that may be true. That characterization may be accurate. But if you're talking about a place that isn't one of those places with less gun regulation and gun crime, a place like Utah where I live, that's obviously not going to be the case. And not even just to speak of that, just the fact that people live in different places, people have different experiences. Individuals, have different abilities. If I have a firearm on my body, which I can't do at this point because I'm not yet 21 in Utah, you can't carry until you are 21, so following the laws there, yeah. If I have, though, for the sake of argument, if I have a firearm on my body and I am trained with that firearm, if bullets start flying, am I going to have a super difficult time dealing with that? Well, maybe I will, but I'll certainly have a much higher chance of being able to deal with that sort of situation than someone who doesn't have that training, or someone who doesn't have the firearm on them, or something to that effect. Point being that this is a result of Don Lemon's collectivist viewpoint. It's a result of the fact that Don Lemon believes everyone falls into neat categories, and that everyone is the average of whatever groups they are a part of. Of course, the truth of the matter, and the truth of statistics, is that the average person does not exist. There is no such thing as the average man, as the average man is such a specific and frankly contradictory concept if you include every average that exists. There is no one who applies to all of them. Some people will apply to certain averages, of course, because that's how averages work, but the average person doesn't exist. And the same goes no matter how far down you go, unless you go directly to the individual. That's just statistics. That's just how that works. And this is really basic statistics, but many people do not understand this. Though, I think I know another thing that may be stirring this on. Because, you see, it turns out that not only Don Lemon, but every major CNN figure may have a blind spot on the right, and focus almost entirely on left-leaning sources. And this is coming from a tool from a place called Ground News, which essentially scans through people's timelines, sees what they interact with, and determines whether they may or may not have a blind spot for whatever particular news they aren't reacting to. If someone is not interacting with right-wing news or left-wing news, no matter what that news may be, it is at least somewhat more likely that they aren't going to be looking at that news, and they aren't going to be doing that. Of course, it's not completely of a surety, because it's only measuring interaction, not viewing or anything of that sort. But it gives a pretty stark indication of what people are really paying attention to. And in the case of Don Lemon, he was analyzed through this app, and it was determined that that 95% of the news that Lemon interacts with on Twitter leans left. Now, it is worth it to mention at this point that this particular app, this particular device, and how it measures news, it's not right-leaning. It's not like this is put up by someone like the Daily Wire, though the article is, the actual tool is not. I would actually argue that this tool is pretty biased towards the left, because here's the thing. I looked up how they do this sort of thing and looked at certain news organizations, and I found that places like the BBC are considered to be essentially center, slightly lean left, and CNN is also considered to be in a very similar category to the BBC. These people are even biasing these results to the left, or I mean to the right in this case, because they're putting a lot of networks that are left-leaning in the center category. So if Don Lemon interacts with a BBC Twitter account, then that doesn't get counted as a left-leaning, or at least for the most part it doesn't, as it does acknowledge that at least leans a little bit left, but it gets counted in the center column. So yeah, even in this case, it is actually understating the case. In fact, it may be more like 98% of the news that Don Lemon is interacting with is left-leaning. And by left-leaning, in this case, it seems to mean communist. It's just insane. It is fascinating to see Don Lemon fall into this rabbit hole. He's becoming a new Rachel Maddow. As we speak, we are seeing it happen. Those quotes are real, and they've happened all within the past month. It is really, really fascinating to see someone delve this deep and just have such a lack of understanding about something as basic as, like, what God is supposed to be there for. It is insane. I just can't overstate it. It's impossible to overstate just how much this guy is out of touch with anything that isn't farther to the left than Mao. Yeah. Moving on, though, to our next segment, where we're going to be talking a bit about the border, because there have been some updates. And it starts from here with a Biden staffer blocking Ted Cruz from taking video of a border facility. Because you see, Ted Cruz went down to the border. Him being from Texas, of course, this making at least a bit of sense. His constituents do live on that border, so it makes sense for him to go down there and actually check it out. He did so, but when he got there, a Biden staffer was like, no, you can't see, you can't look into this place because, well, the pictures are a bit inconvenient for us. You see, I already talked about the Project Veritas pictures that were already put out that showed people being packed into such a tight space. And really, it's only seemed to be gotten worse, where we have discovered that there are particular areas that were only designed to hold around 70 to 80 people that have hundreds of people within them. Hundreds. And this is in a case where the pandemic is still going on, where there's supposedly supposed to be social distancing at every single federal building, which these particular border cases would actually be a part of. These places are supposed to follow social distancing and masking standards, but it seems that in this case, they're not being followed, which is an interesting thing and shows a bit about what the Biden administration really cares about. Of course, they don't really care about it when they aren't expecting any cameras to be around, and so in most of these pictures, you see almost no masks whatsoever, though of course there are a few still, because we live in an insane society that believes 1.5% decrease in chance to actually get it is somehow justifiable for such an annoying piece of clothing. But beyond that, it seems to me that these people are being put into this place in just an insane way. And it is very telling that Biden has been shooing away reporters all this while, and he's been doing it even more, who are trying, he's not only trying to get them away, but he's also trying to get he urged a Republican senator to actually delete photos of the crowded borders facility, of the truth. Senator, in this case, Mark Braun from Indiana, had told the Washington Examiner that a Biden aide had told him to delete these photos, I think probably on his Twitter account or something to that effect. And, of course, he didn't do it because this is great political hate, and I expect him to use this as political hate for a good long while. But it just shows the attitude that Biden has taken. Because compare this to the Trump administration. during the Trump administration, there were many times where Trump was practically begging the media organizations to actually go into these facilities. Because the truth was at that time that the defense that the Biden administration is now taking, that, oh, no, we're treating them well, no, there's no overcrowding, don't worry about it, we're sending them all back, was actually true in the Trump administration. They were actually doing those things. The facilities that they had were actually well put together, and the places that they were in for less than 72 hours, they actually were in for less than 72 hours, and it wasn't actually overcrowded. And once they got out of that facility, they did, in fact, look like a summer camp. And Trump was trying to get the press in there so that they could tell the truth. But of course, the press weren't interested in telling the truth. People have been complaining, of course, even at this juncture, about the media backlash about Biden, saying that he is getting way worse treatment than Trump. Of course, this coming from Biden voters, and I swear these are real tweets. If you don't believe me, go on the Biden Els account. It's a gold mine, of course, but just watch and see the absolute levels of disconnection from reality that some of these people have. They believe that because the press is covering at all an actual scandal where he is actually conducting a cover-up at this moment is evidence of the media being biased against Biden. And this is, of course, only after weeks of everyone on the right-wing media talking about it. It, of course, took them weeks to actually start talking about it at all, and that was also only at the point when they were locked out, when they were limited from actually seeing what was going on. That was the only point at which many of these left-wing outlets were actually covering this crisis at all. That was the only... It took till that point. Yet it's biased against Biden. Of course, yeah. But at the time when Trump had a legitimate defense, one, that the photos that were seen were not from the Trump administration, and two, that the conditions at the border were actually pretty good. Hey, come look at it. You can go in. That's what Trump was doing. Compare that to Biden stopping senators from looking in, and every single reporter, to the point where Project Veritas has to actually do some reporting and actually, go into the places where they aren't being allowed to go, getting leakers to actually show these photos, because at this point, all of the photos that we've seen are only coming from Project Veritas, essentially. And any of the inside photos, I believe, are exclusively culled from that particular source. But of course, it's the right-wing media that lies all the time. It's the right-wing media that's biased or whatever. Of course, right-wing media is biased. I'm not going to deny that, but they're honest about it. It's okay to be biased if you're honest about it. And that's something people need to get past their thick skulls. And also, something that will eventually happen, Trump has said that he'll visit the U.S.-Mexico border soon. And this is good politicianing. This is a good strategy. Plain and simple, this is exactly what Trump should be doing. He should be pointing out every single time where Biden is a disaster, and this, at least at this point, is the prime example of such. Of course, there are other things which are going through at this point, with Hunter Biden lying on the ATF form, which may get him jail time at this point, which is another thing that I hope actually happens, or maybe we'll actually get some closure on something that the Hunter Biden whole thing was. And this is, as I said, good politicking. It's something that everyone has been saying, but everything that Trump should do from this point forward, from the time Biden has gotten into office to the point where where the 2024 election has come and passed, all Trump should do is point out, well, it wasn't a disaster under me. Well, it wasn't a disaster under me because, objectively, it wasn't a disaster under Trump. The border was not a disaster under Trump. Gas prices were not a disaster under Trump, under any year. even under record growth rates. But now it's up and doubled. It has gone up from like $2 a gallon where I'm at to now I went to fill up my car yesterday, and it was a full 370, and that's like the lowest tier of gas, which is just insane. It's just not even fathomable, because I wasn't able to drive back in, of course, 2008 to 11ish, when gas prices I know were ridiculous. I know they were ridiculous, but I never experienced it, and I'm beginning to experience it, and it's awful. Trump needs to talk about all this sort of stuff. Of course, he doesn't have as much access to things like Twitter and the like, and he isn't able to live tweet these sorts of things, and which is why I'm at least partially more supportive of things like the Trump social media thing that is in the works, at least, than some people are. Though, of course, I would actually prefer that he were on something like Minds or the like, which, by the way, follow my Minds. It's over here. It's in the link down in the description. And on that note, actually, that's where I'm going to leave us off. If you enjoyed this video, do, in fact, subscribe wherever you are. Though, if you are on YouTube, go and look down in the description. There are many very pretty links down there that can send you to all sorts of wonderful places like BitChute, like Odyssey, like Minds, and all of those sorts of places, as I already mentioned before. And also to certain places where I aggregate my videos, where I put out links to where I've put my videos of the day. And that would be mostly Parler and Gab, though I also put the BitChute links out in my Minds, and by the way, on BitChute, my videos go out first there, and I also put my thoughts on Minds whenever I think of it. And also, I am on Gitmo Life, though the link isn't down there yet, so I'll put it there eventually. But hey, that's all. I'm KelKidman, this has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.